Welcome back into episode 7. This is Dave with the Believe podcast, and I have a somewhat cool one for you today. And this one's going to be all about how to be a, religious or faith based role model to someone else in your life. And I'm saying this from a perspective of I don't know if I actually have been to anybody else. I haven't really gotten that kind of feedback for anybody else, but I sort of had, an opportunity here and there. So I'll discuss that in tonight's episode, but as I always like to remind you guys at the top and bottom of each of these episodes here, I want to hear from you. Let me know your comments. Have you been provided an opportunity, or are you currently a role model in a religious perspective, or maybe in other aspects of your life to somebody else? And if so, let me know all about it in the comments section in YouTube and Spotify. All right, let's unpack this one here. I got a few different bullet points to trifle on down and blather on about here. So let's just dive right into it. All right, how to be a role model. This is interesting because I don't think I've ever been a role model necessarily to anybody in my life. Or I shouldn't necessarily say that. Like I've had the opportunity to be. Now, there are different opportunities where you can be like a mentor at your work or your job or whatever. I mean, you could be a tutor, so sort of in that way, that would be somewhat of a mentorship of trying to pass down some knowledge in some way. But in this episode today, we're going to be specifically talking about more of the religious or faith-based aspect of things. And what does that mean? This is going to be different from, just going, to a priest for confession or something like that, like asking for advice in that way. Like, could you have somebody like that as a role model? Sure, if you wanted to have that kind of relationship, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be somebody who is a member of the cloth, so to speak, in order to have that title of being a mentor, or for you to have that opportunity to be a role model in certain aspects. And I've talked about my aunt a lot, but I think she's very religious minded, even though she's Baptist and I'm Catholic. She does serve as a source of inspiration for me and probably some other family members, even though they might not want to admit it. She serves as this kind of guiding light in a certain way. So, first point that I have here on my notes that I want to talk about is, and I'm going to be talking about this a lot on the channel, but it's this idea, and I can't shake it because it's 100% true, and it's that people are naturally defensive. So I can't stress this enough, not only in this topic, but in future topics to come. You cannot force something on people. People in general are going to be defensive. They're going to want to come to their own conclusions on their own terms, in their own way. So right off the bat, I might discourage a ton of people because they might look at that and go like, well, what the heck am I going to do now that if I can't actually like reach out to somebody and I have to wait for them kind of to come to me? And that's another one of my bullet points, is a certain level of patience here. But unfortunately, and like I had mentioned in a previous episode too, where I once I found the low carb lifestyle, right, and a different type of subject here, a different aspect, I was like, man, how does everybody not know about this? I got to shout it from the rooftops and jump on my soapbox and tell everybody who's willing to listen about it. And then I find out that nobody really cares. Nobody really, especially if you're trying to go out of your way, or if it's somebody who you might look at as unhealthy or something, to like say like, oh, you need this, like you should adopt this right away kind of thing. People just don't take to that. And it's very difficult to sit somebody down and try to force feed them something and say like, hey, look at me, look at how it worked for me, or look at my own personal anecdotes, and here's some literature on it, and here's how you can debunk science by going low carb and blah 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 blah. People don't really care, honestly. It's kind of interesting, especially when you get really jazzed about something really works for you, and something really clicks in your mind, that light bulb goes off and you're like, man, like I gotta tell everybody about this. Is the best thing since sliced bread. And you go out there and you try to sell it and you try to pitch it and you find that nobody's buying and you just kind of like left there like looking around shocked going like how is nobody getting this? How is nobody else understanding this? Or how is only like a small section of the population understanding this when it should be like widespread knowledge? And that's what's difficult about anything that you try to do or anything that really works for you is how do I bestow that onto somebody else and because you want to help, right? It's always usually coming from a good place where you're not just trying to swindle people out of their money or whatever. It's not some sort of gimmicky kind of thing. It's usually somebody that you know personally where you're like, oh, maybe it's a family member or a close friend where you're like, I can change their lives for the better. Why don't they just do what I say kind of thing, right? That's not how it works. That's not how God works. It's not how faith works and how religion works. And that's kind of fascinating. So that was a hard lesson for me to learn right off the bat is that people are naturally defensive and they're not necessarily going to put up a fight, but they're most likely just going to ignore you, just not listen, depending on how you kind of come at them, right? So if you're just kind of trying to bulldoze your way in with your grand ideas of, oh man, here's the roadmap. I got X, Y, and Z like laid out for you, steps 1 through 10, and if you follow them in this order, then you're gonna, like that those infomercials that you see all over social media and over commercials and stuff, right? You just got follow my 10-step program to success kind of thing. Like nobody cares about that, and it just doesn't stick. So the next bullet points that I have, or the rest of the bullet points that I have, will hopefully try to peel back that layer, the layers of the onions, right? If we want to use a Shrek reference here, to get to the core a little bit more. I wouldn't say easily, but a little bit better. I don't know. I'm lacking words here as I'm recording this a little bit later on in the evening, so apologies there. Next bullet point that I have here is to be open to listening and not just listening, but truly understanding. Like if somebody comes to you, especially if they know, maybe you're a little bit more of a quote unquote religious person, again, whatever that means to you today in today's day and age. And they're like, okay, Dave, I know, I see that you go to church, you went to a Catholic high school, seem to be more in tune with your faith a little bit more. Here's what I got for you. Somebody comes to you like that, and it really, and not just with religion, but any aspect of your life. First thing you got to do is be cool. Especially if it's like your spouse or something, and they're actually like genuinely coming to you to ask you your advice, you're going to be like shocked. You might have like this huge grin on your face and you're like, what? Like, no way you're actually coming to me, right? Like, first thing I got to say is be cool. Do not overblow it because you're going to scare them away if you do it that way. Or maybe you got kids, right? And like teenagers who are like legit trying to come to you for advice. First step is to be cool about it. Don't blow it out of proportion. And truly lend an ear. Listen and try to understand where they're coming from. And that's the first thing that you have to do. You can't, like I said, one of the biggest mistakes, especially when people are defensive, is you can't bulldoze your way. You can't say like, this is what you got to do. And only like listen to the first couple of words of what they're saying and then immediately try to flip it and go, well, this is what you need to do. This is what, this is how you have to construct it. And these are all the different steps that you have to take. Get that out of your head right away. First thing you really got to do is sit down and listen and understand where they're coming from. There is empathy that you need there. You really have to try to put yourself in their shoes and realize what they're feeling, what they're truly saying to you, and break that down first. Maybe that comes in the form of reiterating what they're saying, like, this is what I hear you saying, and trying to have a little bit of a conversation back and forth to like really hone in on exactly what it is they're trying to get across to you first. But that's the first thing that you got to do. Even though your mind in the back end might be racing with like, okay, this is how I would tackle it, this is how I would do it, blah, 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 blah. You're already potentially like skipping to the end of like, all right, this is my advice and this is what I'd give to them. Don't do that first, right? The First thing you got to do is just sit back, listen, take it all in, understand where they're coming from. It's kind of weird. It's almost like you're a therapist at a certain point, right? Or to a certain degree, where it's just like, I just have to like take in what they're giving me here. But I thought that was a really poignant thing to say right off the bat, is to just, again, knowing that people are naturally defensive, sit there and go, all right, let me just take in what they're saying first. Next thing that I have for you here is I mean, these aren't necessarily in order. The first two kind of were, so I kind of like that, but I'm looking at the rest of these here and I'm like, this might not be the best, but they're all to the end game here, or leading up to the end game. Second thing that I have for you is to lead by example. Remember those WWJD bracelets from about 25 years ago now? What would Jesus do, kind of thing? So lead by example. And again, this kind of comes back to my Franciscan order or branch of the, branch of Catholicism, or what I follow more closely. And that's what the Franciscans try to do, is to really like put themselves in Jesus's shoes and walk the way that he did. It's really about like trying to embody what JC did as much as they can. And, that really should trickle down to every single one of us, too. Like, trying to think, like, what would he do in this situation? And in that frame of thinking, or in that way of thinking, and going along with that, is to lead by doing, like setting the example for that other person. And that could be a big reason why they're coming to you to begin with. And, why they're trying to reach out to you to begin with, is because they see you are already walking the walk, right? You're not just talking a talk, you're walking the walk, and they see that and they respect that, and there's a certain level of respect that they have for you, and that's why they're coming to you for that advice. But it doesn't necessarily mean that like it stops there, like the buck stops there. Like you have to continue doing that, and it's not just like you're doing it for some specific end game. Like you're doing it because this is how you want to live your life. So in that way, especially like a faith journey, walk the walk, right? Lead by doing, show by examples. Like it's so difficult for me not to give this example, but I'm saving it for my signs episode. But, and the whole reason why I started this podcast, right, is I was kind of trying to look for a sign from God to do this podcast, and it was based off of this one thing that, in effect, was basically me leading by example. It was me practicing my faith and showing to this person that I was doing this, right? I wasn't hiding it. I wasn't trying to do it off to the side. This was just me being me, kind of thing. So in a certain way, being religious, and again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to Bible study or you have to be a huge volunteer service kind of person, right? It could just be about just being a good person. Just trying to practice your faith, going to church, trying to just, again, walk the way Jesus did, and be, a truly genuine, good, humble person. So it doesn't have to be these grandstand gestures of, huge proportions. It could be, simple things, just everyday kind of things. So lead by doing, that's the third point there. Next bullet point that I have is for all you parents out there. And this is going to be a big challenge, especially if you come from a split home, you come from, maybe your spouse is an atheist and you're not, kind of thing, or they're Jewish and you're Catholic or Muslim or whatever. Aside from, I think, money, I'm trying to think of the other things that couples really like stress out about. Money is definitely one of them, but I think the other thing could be religion. If you're not on the same page, if you didn't come from similar backgrounds, or like I said, if one is just not a believer at all and the other one is, the idea of like, how do we raise the kids comes up. And it could be in other aspects too, but one of the main ones could be religion and faith. How do we raise the kids, right? So the next thing would be that's a whole nother topic. Is how do you have those conversations with your spouse if you're on completely different pages? I might save that for a future episode. But what I wanted to say in this one is more so geared towards like how you introduce your faith or your religion to your kids, and it's kind of different. It's different than trying to be a role model for somebody closer to your own age, or even if they're older than you potentially, versus these are your kids. So if they're your kids and you're trying to raise them, here's my personal anecdote for this one. Would be how my parents raised us kids. So my parents were on the same page, and the best that they knew to do was to just introduce us kids to it and put us through the steps. In Catholicism, we got baptism, first communion, confirmation, and those steps, right? And they kind of forced that on us, and that could be tricky as well. Like, how do you handle that? How do you go through those different steps when, again, knowing that people are naturally defensive? Like, I don't think my own brother really took to that well, but I did. And we're just kind of different personalities. So I actually respected my parents for introducing the faith to us, but they didn't really necessarily jam it down our throats, but they did try to get us all the way through at least our confirmation, which is a little bit older. I mean, we were like, what, like 16 or something? Around that age when we went through that, 16, 17. And, especially once you get to those like teenage, rebellious age, it becomes even more of a struggle to try and get kids to really do anything there. But I do agree with my folks in a certain regard here, in that I kind of agree with just providing the opportunity and showing your kids what it's all about. Do I necessarily want to say that like I would force my kids, if I were to have kids, to go through all of those steps and say like, well, you have to get through confirmation, otherwise what? I don't know. Like you're grounded or something. I don't know. It's a difficult task, right? It's difficult to really like know where the buck stops there, as far as like, hey, especially if you consider yourself more in tune with your faith and religion, you want to be able to provide that for your kids and try to set them on at least a similar path, even if it isn't in the same arena that you're into or the same denomination that you're into, but like just faith in general. You want to provide that example, and you want to give that to them, and that's a different relationship potentially than what you might be thinking of, as far as like a different kind of role model of somebody who might be closer in age to you, or so like a friend, or somebody who might not necessarily be a churchgoer or whatever, or might be on the fence about their faith or whatever. That could be it's a different relationship there. But I do believe, as a little quick side note here, parents, you do have the challenge of how do you introduce this to your kids. And, going back to the second bullet point, I think you have to, the third bullet point, the previous one here, is you have to lead by doing. My folks did it by having us kids go to church, and that was kind of reinforced by my mom a little bit more so than my dad, of like, hey, this is what you do in order to like practice in your faith, and they set that example, right? Because they did it. They led by their own example, and that's how us kids were introduced to it. But I never really felt like I was forced to do it growing up. But to me, it just felt like, all right, this is something that's being introduced by my folks, and they're giving us the opportunity to go down this path a little bit more. So I feel for those parents out there who are trying to introduce this to their kids. Again, it could be a whole nother episode to unpack there, but I do feel like, as the quick wrap up to this bullet point, you do have to introduce it to your kids. I think you have to. It's so difficult to say like force them to do it, because it's not really what you're doing, but you do need to introduce it to them. You have to explain a little bit more to them, and that's a different kind of relationship than what you might have with somebody else who comes to you asking for your advice. That's all I'll say about that. And the last thing that I'll say here, and this is really going back to the whole role model thing, or if somebody's coming to you for advice to begin with, is to show them that you're human and to show that we all make mistakes. And that's sort of what I try to emphasize here on this podcast as well, is, through my own personal anecdotes of trying to, let you guys know that I'm human. Like, I'm not perfect. Nobody is. And I think by showing somebody who's coming to you for some sort of advice or guidance that you're not perfect, by giving them those anecdotes of like, hey, this is where I messed up, or this is where I wish I could have done better, that's providing another alternative way to reach them that isn't in a direct manner. It's not like you literally saying like, this is what you got to do kind of thing. Because again, you're going to regress back to that whole defensive nature side of them, because people don't like being talked to or feeling like they're talked down to, even though that might not be your intention. So by using empathy, by showing that you're human, by giving those personal anecdotes and telling them about your mistakes, they're able to more closely relate to you in that way and empathize in return back to you, because you're showing that you're vulnerable at the same time, if that makes sense. So definitely as a tactic, I would say, show them that you're human, show them that you made mistakes, and tell them about your journey. You're kind of like, if you kind of understand what I'm trying to say here, it's almost like you're skirting around trying to talk to them directly. You're trying to give them all these different things of like, wow, this was my experience, and this is what I went through, and this is how I messed up, and you're starting this whole thing by really trying to listen to them and trying to hear where they're coming from, and then I would say transition into your own personal anecdotes about different things, but you're never necessarily directly saying like, I think you should do this. And I think that's important. That's an important thing that I really want to overemphasize in this episode, is try to avoid doing that at all costs. And what I mean by that is, and again, kind of wrapping it back around it, I do this because I have personal experience in this, as far as like my low carb eating journey, right, or like my healthier eating journey. I learned that the hard way, where I tried to tell people who are close to me like, this is what you need to do. You got to do this. You got to do this. And it doesn't work. It doesn't land. It doesn't stick. I would say only try to take that approach if they ask you that directly. If they're sitting there saying like, Dave, just tell me what to do. I need, like, they're the type of person where they're like, I need that structure. I need to know the steps that I need to take in order to be successful, whether it's a faith journey or whatever, or any other aspect of life. That's when you should give it to them. That's going to be your urge. That's what you're going to want to do from the onset, because you're going to have that in mind. You're going to be like, all right, this is what worked for me. I think it could work for you. Or if you just alter this in a certain way, then this is the path that you got to go down. That's going to be your urge. And I'm going to tell you, like, resist the urge to do that at all costs, unless they specifically ask you for that. If they come to you specifically at a certain point in the conversation and go, I hear what you're saying, but like, what do I need to do? Like, give me the advice kind of thing. Without actually, they're not going to say like, well, maybe they will. I don't know. Maybe they might actually say like, okay, give me the advice. Like, what advice do you have? That's when you unload that. And again, be cool about it. Don't be like, oh, he or she finally asked, so let me, okay, X, Y, and blah, 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 and like ramble off all these different things and rattle it off like a machine gun. Like, don't do that. Still be cool about it, and still try to approach it with all these other steps in mind, with empathy and with leading by example and all that other kind of stuff. But that's when you can be a little bit more direct. Only if they ask you point blank for that advice. So I think that'll wrap this one up. That's what I have on being... Actually, no, I do have one more thing here before we close. I do have another personal anecdote. And it's in regards to... And I'm not sure if I had mentioned this in the past or not. I might have, might not have. But I do want to mention one coworker in particular. I'm not going to use their name, but I saw it as an opportunity. I don't know if I necessarily reached this individual, but I have had a couple of religious discussions with this person so far. This is somebody, again, like I said, a coworker, somebody that I work with, where this person has a partner who um, is from a certain religious background, and my coworker is not really religious, and he's had some struggles with it so far in the past. I've been trying to like skirt around it as far as like a gender goes, but I'm just gonna say it. He's had some struggles with it in the past, and it's now kind of coming back around in a more extreme way with his partner, his girlfriend, and he wasn't really sure about it. So it was interesting. Kind of came up at lunch one day, and he was asking different questions about faith and kind of like the I wouldn't say the textbook, but like the standard questions started to come up of like, if God is all knowing, do you have any real choice in the matter? Is free will actually a thing? If God is already predetermined, things like that, right? And I kind of want to. I might save this to unpack again in a future episode, but I wanted to bring it up here because I saw it as a an opportunity for me. Now, he wasn't necessarily coming to me because he knew that I was religious or that I practiced my faith, but I did see it as an opportunity for me to provide my own examples and have a greater discussion with him because he was very curious and he was asking all these questions. And that's really been, so far, my only brush with an opportunity to be a role model for someone else. Now, I don't know if anything that I said really sunk in with them, if any of my own personal examples or anecdotes that I was trying to bring up actually got through to him or necessarily helped him in any way whatsoever. I'm not really sure. Honestly, all I could have done at that time was to tell him what my journey has been so far and how I came to be the way that I was. Because again, that was a little bit different, right? It's not necessarily, like usually when you have an opportunity to be a quote unquote role model, it's because somebody is actively looking for you, but it might not always be that way. And that's why I wanted to throw it in here as part of my personal anecdote is that, he wasn't specifically looking for this advice, but we had this greater conversation around it because he had these questions that he felt like he didn't have answers to before. So it is an opportunity. I kind of viewed it as an opportunity for me there. But again, I treated it in such a way where, I kind of had my kitty gloves on where I didn't want to try to force anything down his throat or say anything in a particular, like, decisive kind of way of like, this is how you should do things. I was really trying to approach it with these bullet points in mind, even though I didn't, have this mindset or this frame of mind before I went into that conversation. But I did have a few of those ideas in mind in regards to, like I had mentioned, about healthy eating and whatnot from the past. So I kind of applied those to this particular conversation. Anyway, I think I'll save that for another episode in the future. But I just wanted to let you guys know about that here. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who is looking to you specifically for your religious advice. It could just be like a conversation or something that they're struggling with. Again, God works in mysterious ways, folks. So he's going to provide you with opportunities when you least expect it in different ways and people that you might not have thought of before. So there's these opportunities here, there, and everywhere to lead by example, to show people what you've been able to accomplish. And again, not to bulldoze your way through and tell them what to do, but to provide that lend an ear, provide that understanding, really listen to somebody, and try to show them that you're vulnerable too, that you don't have all the answers as well. But if they want your advice, maybe you have something to give to them. So I'll wrap it up there. Again, I want to remind everybody, if you're listening over on YouTube or Spotify, there's a comment section. Light up that comment section. Give me your own personal anecdotes of whether or not you have been a role model. You've had an opportunity to be a role model for somebody else, in particular with your faith, but maybe it's for other stuff too. You can drop that as well. Or is it the flip side? Have you been trying to seek advice from somebody else? Have you been trying to, view somebody else as a role model for your faith journey? Let me know all about it. I need those comments. We gotta get the community boards going on this one. And again, if you don't want to have your comment shared, I will not share it. Just mention that in your comment. Or if you want your comment shared, but you don't want your name shared, just say that as well, and I'll omit your name, but use your comment. But I really need these comments to drive these discussions, because that's what this podcast is all about. It's not just me talking to the universe. I need some feedback from y'all. So let me know all about it in the comments section on this one. Don't have a teaser for the next episode. I don't think I'm going to do an every other episode, so I don't think the next one is going to be another Ten Commandment episode. I think I'll do yet another episode in between here on a different topic before getting into another Ten Commandment episode. But no teaser for the next one, so apologies on that one. But thanks for listening this week, and I'll catch you on the next one.